Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale motorized Tamiya French B1 bis heavy tank. The model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these smaller scale build videos, I often take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35th scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. The model is built mostly out of the box, however does feature a handful of custom mods that were added to the model outside of the kit. We'll be going over all of these additions as well as the basic kit and components as well as the features that the kit has in this video. Now, if any of my subscribers or frequent viewers of the channel are out there watching this video and getting a strange sense of been there, done that, or deja vu, that's because this is not the first time a 1/35th scale French B1 bis has been showcased in one of my model videos. The first time I've done a B1 bis was about last year, and that model is found on the ECA channel as well as on pictures of that build are posted on the ECA Facebook page. This model here is similar to that build, however, this kit here is that of the motorized version of the kit, as opposed to the last build, which was the static variation. First, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. This vehicle here is the French Char B1 bis heavy tank. The bis was the heavy tank which was deployed by the French Army at the very beginning phases of World War II in 1940. The vehicle was designed with many of the lessons that the French learned from their experiences in World War I. The tank itself was designed in the interwar period of the 1920s as well as into the 1930s. By the mid-1930s, the design was approved and the vehicle was adopted and went into production. The vehicles were primarily produced by Renault, however, there were other manufacturing firms that also produced this vehicle. The B1 bis is actually a smaller part to a bigger puzzle. At this time, the French were actively pursuing and upgrading their armor development and their tank designs. The B1 bis was to be utilized for the heavy tank role, however the French were also developing a wide selection of tanks from light all the way up to the medium as well as even a super heavy. All of these new tank designs that the French were developing were at this point cutting edge. And of all of the world powers, the French were very serious with the undertaking of their armor development. In contrast, the other military powers of the period were reducing and slashing their military spending budgets, and because of this, new research and development on armament as well as tank and tank designs were hindered. Of course, the outliers in this is that of Germany, the USSR, and Japan, who all three were actively pursuing new military technologies. However, all three of them were doing it mostly behind closed doors. As for the bis itself, this vehicle came in at 28 tons, had a crew of 4, and it used a Renault inline 6-cylinder 16.5 liter gasoline engine. As for the vehicle speed, the tank came in at 17 miles an hour on paved roads and 13 miles an hour going off-road. In addition to being well armored, the vehicle also had some pretty big armament of the period. For its main gun, it utilized a 75mm ABS SA-35 howitzer, which was actually controlled and aimed by the driver. As for its secondary armament, it featured a smaller 47mm SA-34 or SA-35, which was located inside of a fully revolving turret. This type of layout, where you have the main armament in the hull and a smaller armament in the turret, was common back then and was seen on other vehicles such as the early versions of the Churchill, as well as the M3 Lee. Unlike the French super heavy tank Char 2C, in which there were only a small handful that were actually built and fielded by the time the war started, the B1 bis was in production for a little while and had a decent number of units that were ready to be fielded by the time the war started. In total, approximately 405 units were built and were ready for action in 1940. Unlike the French super heavy tank Char 2C, in which there were only a small handful that were actually built and were ready to be fielded during the war's start, the B-1 BIS actually was in production for a little while, and by the time the war started, there were approximately 405 units that were fully built. Now, although the vehicle technically was one of the best tank designs of this period, the Char B-1 BIS did not stop the Germans from fully conquering France and continuing all the way up to the Channel. The reason for this is not necessarily because of the actual technical aspects of the vehicle, it was more or less with the type of tactics which were being utilized by the French. The Germans were able to outmaneuver and outperform the French tank battalions. However, with the few occasions where the Char B-1 BIS did engage the German army, the Wehrmacht did have a significant hard time in dealing with the heavy armor found on these vehicles. Now, the story of the B-1 BIS does not end with the fall of France in 1940. In fact, after the French surrendered to the Germans wound up with a large stockpile of French armor, including the B-1 BIS. The Germans went ahead and repurposed these vehicles to better suit their needs. These repurposed vehicles were sent to rear echelon units all throughout the occupied sections of Europe. It's also important to point out that the Free French forces themselves also reutilized the B-1 BIS and were used by the Free French all the way up to the end of the war. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the models first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplied you with. And here's the model just before the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I will be utilizing this plastic 1/35 scale B-1 BIS from Tamiya. Now, like I mentioned in my other B-1 BIS video, the Tamiya B-1 BIS kit dates back to about 2002 or 2003. That tank was originally released as a static model kit. Fast forward to 2014, Tamiya went ahead and retooled some aspects of the base kit in order to make it motorized. During this period of time, from 2013 to about 2015, Tamiya were releasing and modifying several of their past releases with that of being motorized. Now, motorized kits are really nothing new for Tamiya. In fact, a motorized tank kit dates back all the way to Tamiya's founding, and most of their older kits on the market do have motorizational features to them. However, what's unique about the BIS was that this kit was designed from the ground up to be static, and Tamiya had to remodify and retool it in order to get it to the motorization specs. The kit itself was acquired from Amazon.com. It is a relatively recent addition to the stash and has been sitting in the shop for a little under a year. Not really a whole lot of dust on the box. As for the kit, like I said, I acquired from Amazon.com. These kits are fairly prolific on the internet and can be found on eBay, Amazon, and you might be lucky in snagging one in a local hobby shop if one does stock these Tamiya kits. As for price, they run a little bit more than the static version of the kits, and these kits here can be found anywhere between about 50 to 60 US dollars. Now, starting with the model's box art, the model's box art is the exact same version that is found on the static version of the kit. The only difference is that of the rest of the graphic design. First and foremost, you'll notice that rather than the standard Tamiya white background, this motorized version here has this beige background present. It's an easy way to distinguish that this is one of the motorized one, and most importantly, it tells you right here that it's the motorized variant. Has a little graphic of the gearbox, and it tells you in big red lettering with single motor. Rest of the graphic design is almost identical to the static version. We have a color chart here with another option to build the tank. Side panel has the same graphic design, only with a little graphics saying that it's motorized, and the motorized version does have this black bar running across. On the other side here, we have the same graphic with that of the spare track, or I should say the workable track links, the metal chain, and over here we have a nice little snippet of the gearbox all mounted inside of the tank's hull. Cracking open the box will show all of the kit contents. Now, just like I mentioned with the other B1 BIS video, this kit here is an all plastic model kit. There are no resin, photo etch, or any type of turned aluminum barrels that are to be found inside the box. This is more or less features found on other manufacturers' kits, not so much on the Tamiya. Having said that, the Tamiya's tooling is going to be very crisp and very detailed for the type of medium that they're represented in, and which is part and parcel for Tamiya quality. Now, I'm also not going to spend too much time going over all these components, as, like I said before, I do more of a thorough unboxing in my other French B1 BIS video, which is found on the channel. So far, a quick run through takes us to the first runner. This here has all of the hull components. Now, these components here are completely unaltered from the other variant. However, the motorized one, I believe, does have a few of these notches which were found on the bottom of the hull. These may or may not be present on the static version. Suspension runner and running gear runner, completely unaltered. Same could be said about the turret, as well as many of the upper hull accessories. The tank utilizes the same workable ABS plastic tracks, which are very nicely detailed. And the upper hull is basically the same. However, Tamiya went ahead and milled out this little slot here in order for you to have the track tension be adjusted, as well as the two holes that are found on the back. These are also for that of the track adjustment setup. It will detract slightly from the overall look of the model in that the real BIS did not have these two big holes in the back. However, it is one of the concessions that need to be made in order to get the model in operating condition. Now towards the last bits of the runner. This is where the kit changes from the static version to the motorized one. Starting with this runner here. This runner here comprises of all the components that are used to install the gearbox, as well as the battery compartment, which is needed in order to convert the model. We also have here two little cones, which are adapters for the sprockets in order to make them attach to the gearbox. And this bag here, we have the actual mechanical components. Starting with a pre-wired gearbox. The gearbox seems to be of good quality. The gears are broad plastic gears, and if they're anything like the other Tamiya gearboxes, which I have used on other builds, this gearbox should output with enough performance to have the model run very well. We have here the batteries. Looks like it runs on 2 AA's, which is more than enough for a 1/35 scale motorized only tank. A few other pieces of hardware, as well as battery clips and a little tube of grease. Getting down to the bottom takes us to the first decal sheet. This is the same decal sheet which is present on the static version, as well as also the very nicely illustrated color chart. Finally, the end takes us to the instructions. The instructions, again, are going to have very much a lot of similarities from the static version, but like this page I opened up here, will have the actual instructions on how to convert the tank to being motorized. Starting with the suspension of the model, the suspension components that you see here are exactly the same and carried over from the static version of the kit, which is not a surprise judging from the unboxing portion of the video. Now, the bottom wheels do rotate, and they do rotate very smooth, and the tank is a very smooth runner. Now, there is no articulating suspension, and the suspension is fixed. This is different from the real version of the tank, as on the real French B1 BIS, the suspension did have some articulating capabilities, but nothing near to the level as would come on later tank designs. On the real French B1 BIS was a lot similar to that of a bulldozer, in which all of the wheels are mounted on a solid mount, to which then is spring-bound and kept in this large pontoon that we have here on the side. Because the suspension is non-articulating and is fixed, it does have some benefits. First is ease of construction. This design here makes assembly very, very simplistic, and this whole tank actually goes together very quickly. Another benefit is that of robustness. The suspension here is more than robust enough to hold up the rigors of motorization use, which this tank does need. While on the lower extremities, this is an important time to point out exactly how the tank must come apart in order for you to get access to the motorizational equipment. Now, this is extremely important, as you cannot get access to even change out the batteries without having to disassemble the entire model. Now, this is where you can see how this kit in particular is a static model that was re-engineered to be motorized, as opposed to the older Tamiya kits, which were originally engineered to be motorized and then later converted to be static. With those older style models, the model upper and lower disassembles in a very seamless and very quick and efficient way, as opposed to this way here, where it's a little bit more intricate, but it's actually very well thought out nonetheless. The way the kit hulls separate is right over here, between the bottom and upper portions of the side pontoon. This line over here is the actual point where the two have separate, and if I didn't point that out before, I doubt very much if anyone would have noticed it, as this crease line is present on the real tank and is found on the static counterpart. Now, because the way the upper and lower hull halves are designed, you're going to have a mixture of some of the pieces, like an idler wheel or even some portions of the back, that are connected to the upper, while the rest are connected to the lower. This is going to make reinsertion a little bit trickier compared to something like an M60 or an M48 that the upper and lower halves simply just connect and disconnect. Holding the entire model together, that's facilitated by this one fastener that we have here. It's an Allen fastener which is applied with the model, and this one fastener is what gives all of the strength to hold pieces together. Unlike the older models which have polycaps for this, that's not the case on this kit over here. Now, where this model becomes tricky is having to remove the track. In order to disassemble the model, you must remove the track. Now, you can't just simply unconnect the track links that we have over here, as prolonged use of doing that will actually add wear and tear to the pins and can possibly wear them down, which will cause a lot of issues when it comes time to actually running of the model. So it's not recommended to do that. The way you're supposed to take off the tracks is actually with that of the sprocket. On the back here of the tank, we have two holes that are found on the rear plate. Now, these two holes are not present on the static version and unfortunately are absolutely required in order to have the tank motorized. What these two do is that they have two functions. First, they give track tension to the actual sprockets, and you can adjust the tension of the entire gearbox by loosening and or tightening of one or both of the fasteners. When it comes time for disassembly, with the supplied Allen wrench, you go and you actually loosen the track tension all the way. This in turn will move the sprocket inward and will lose the track tension, and the track will be loose enough for you to slide the track off of the model. Here I went ahead and loosened the track tension. As you can see, the track is now very floppy. It is at this point here where you can carefully slide off the track. Like so. With the tracks now removed, it is now time to get access to the bottom fastener. Again, with the same Allen wrench, I loosen the component, and the fastener unthreads. Now, it's a very long thread fastener, so you want to threaten it, or loosen it, I should say, up until the point where it's no longer grabbing onto any sort of the internal metal fastener. It's at this point here, adjust the camera, okay, where I could pop off the lower. Now, as you can see, this is where things are going to become a little tricky, as the front 75mm gun is permanently attached to the lower, while the housing is attached to the upper. So you have to do this weird sliding type procedure in order to get it off without damaging anything. Also, you will notice that the sprockets are connected to the upper and separate from the lower, as you see here. There you go. Okay. Now here goes the lower pan. Now, like I said before, I was mistaken in which I said the idler is connected to one of the uppers, and that's not the case, as they're both on the lower. And the rest of the equipment is now on the upper half, which is found here on the underneath. Here you can see the two AAA batteries, which are used to power the model, as well as the gearbox. Now, the gearbox that is found on this model here is a single motor gearbox, and if anyone's wondering, no, you cannot RC convert this model with the stock gearbox that we have here. Why, you may ask? Very simple. To RC convert a model, a tank specifically, you need to have two motors in order to control each of the sprockets separately. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to turn. With a single motor setup like this, that's just not the case, so the model is purely designed to be motorized. As for the rest of the electronics went by fairly easily. It was mostly all pre-wired and pre-soldered together. One place where I did make the improvements, however, was that of the battery leads. The stock Tamiya kit is designed for you to use polycaps in order to hold the wires to the battery leads. This is effective, however, is less than ideal and is not exactly that permanent. It's more or less something that's quick and easy to do and is something that is very simple. However, for this model here, I went ahead and soldered all the leads that were required in order to get a more permanent style setup. After that, as you can see from the gearbox, it spins very smooth. Now, at this point here is where I have to point up an issue I had with this particular kit, but it's not with the design of the kit itself, more or less this particular model that I have here. And what I mean by that is that this model here was missing a parts bag that is absolutely required in order to build this tank and finish it in the manner that you see it here with being motorized. The parts bag that was missing supplied the bushings for that of the gearbox. As you can see, the motors, or the main drive shaft I should say, that emerges out of the hull slides in that little slot there. And you don't want to have the axle spinning and chewing up the plastic. So the Tamiya kit actually has a brass bushing that shields the plastic from any type of wear and has metal on metal, which makes it perform a lot more efficiently. In addition to this, on the interior sprockets themselves, you can see a small little bell housing on the inside portion of the sprocket. Inside this bell housing conceals a large brass threaded nut which has a small little fastener and it grabs onto the main drive shaft. These pieces were missing from the kit, and obviously you absolutely are required to have them in order just to finish the model. When I noticed that the parts bag was missing, I went ahead and contacted Tamiya of America, whose email address is listed on the Tamiya USA website, which is found on the URL below. When I contacted them, their customer service really came through and it was very handy. All they needed was the kit number, as well as a scanned proof of purchase of the instruction sheet, as well as the portion on the instructions that has the parts listing, and you just need to highlight the certain components that you were missing. Within a week, I had the missing components, which allowed me then to progress on the build. So I want to give a shout out to Tamiya USA's customer service, as they were really helpful and are definitely greatly recommended in case anyone does encounter an issue like this. They do have your back. I will now go ahead and reassemble the model. To do that, the 75mm gun it's handy if you have it in the up position like this, to which then I go ahead and very carefully and gently slide everything together. Mating the two halves, make sure that they click together easily. And at this point here, I can now start rethreading on the center fastener. With the fastener now tightened up, I will now go ahead and reinstall the tracks. Now the tracks on the B1 BIS are non-reversible, as which one of my viewers kindly pointed out in my last B1 BIS video, as I accidentally had one of the tracks on reverse, which was fixed, by the way. As for the track links themselves, you will see that there is a small line on the top portion here of the track link. This goes upward and if it's put downward, it's actually a mistake. With the model on its side, I'll go ahead now and reinstall the track again with this little molded in
rod that we have there on the track link pad in the up orientation like I have it. Now, it's also a good idea when you're doing this to put the tank on a nice soft material. Like right now on my tabletop I have this cloth, but like a little pillow of bubble wrap would also be quite helpful. It prevents damage on the paint finish. The tracks go on this way here, where I first loop it around the sprocket. Carefully slide it into the top recesses here, while at the same time making sure it doesn't snag on the little side skirt that we have on the side. Slide it over the idler. It takes a little fiddling, but once you're done, the track is then reinstalled. I will now do the same to the opposite side. And here I have the tracks now installed to the tank. And as you can see, the track pad orientation is on the correct way. It is at this point now where I can start tightening the track tension. Take the Allen wrench, insert it into the location, and I just rotate the wrench until finally I start feeling some resistance, and you're going to start seeing the track tighten up like we have here. In comparison, this here is a track that's still loose, and this track here is in the process of getting tightened. And here we have both tracks now at the correct tension. It's a good idea once you set the tension to turn the tank on and to see if the motor struggles with actually rotating of the track. You could even test it by putting it on the surface and having the tank roll. If the tank does have some difficulty with rotating the track, or even gets sludged up quite a bit if you put it on a surface, chances are your track tension is too tight, and just a small little tweak or turn, just loosening the track tension just slightly, will open up the tolerances and give your tank some better performance. Well, as you can see, the motorization disassembly aspect of the build leaves a lot of room for improvement. However, for the purposes of this build here, will be left as is. Moving on from the motorization aspect of the build, the remainder of the kit was built primarily out of box, and the model went together extremely easily, just like I mentioned in the other B1 BIS video. Now, as for the differences between the two kits, I have here my first B1 BIS. Now, on the motorization version, I went ahead and built it with the other options that I left differently on the first rendition. Namely that of first the fenders. You'll notice that this one here has the fenders that are through and through, as opposed to the other BIS variant that had the fenders with the slot that we have here down the center. Also, as this build here, where it's different is that on the exhaust manifolds. On the exhaust manifolds on the first version, I used the ducted variant, while to build the tank with the camouflage and the markings that we have here, I went with the flattened duct build versions. Some other ways where this kit here I made some improvements is that of the molded in handles. On this portion here, on these two hatches, there are two molded in handles found on the Tamiya kit. These were deleted, and in their place I replaced them with bent pieces of wire. On the front portion of the build, I went ahead and modified the front hatch for the driver so that it's functional. This was another mod that I did on the other B1 BIS as well. The piece does open up, and this top portion here also pivots just like the Tamiya kit. Just like I did with the other Tamiya BIS model that I did, the front periscope was also modified to be functional and can go up and down. Another scratch build detailing that I added was the lift ring found on the 75mm gun mantlet cover. It was fabricated out of a piece of wire, and what's interesting on the BIS is that unlike other vehicles of the period like the Lee or even some of the German tanks in which they have an eyelet found for this section here, the BIS eyelet is actually like a piece of wrought iron that is bent but is not exactly crimped on the other end, and has a very crude looking blacksmith appearance to it. This here was replicated on the model. Another mod that was made was that to the front headlight that we have here. Just like what was mentioned on the other B1 BIS video, I went ahead and replaced the opaque plastic insert for the lens with a new lens fabricated out of some clear epoxy. This also greatly helps the look of the piece compared to trying to use a opaque piece and trying to paint it to replicate that of a lens. Now, just like with the other version, the turret does rotate, the gun does go up and down, and the commander's copula can also rotate as well. Moving our way to the model's paint and the markings, this is one portion where the B1 Bis really stands out as a very fun and interesting vehicle to build. The French had a very large variety of very intricate and colorful camouflage patterns during this portion here of the war. And in addition to the camouflage patterns, this is equally matched with the type of markings and division type insignias that are found on the tanks as well. As for the Tamiya kit in particular, this is where Tamiya really did a good job when designing this kit, as they supply you with a broad range of vehicles to build the model as. In particular, this one here is built as tank number 481 from the 3rd Company 48 Combat Tank Battalion from the 4th Armored Division, which took place in the Battle of France of 1940. As for the way the model is painted with the markings, this is as per the color panel, which is supplied with the Tamiya instructions. And the pattern was copied as close as possible. As for the markings, they went on without a hitch and were applied and lacquered over without any sort of issues to mention. As for the vehicle's name, I will not even attempt to pronounce that, as I do not speak French, and the only thing I will succeed in doing is butchering the French language.
And since the model is motorized, it should at least get driven on my indoor test track that I have here on top of my shop. Now, like I said before, the model is motorized only, and unlike many of the older Tamiya motorized models in which they have a reversible switch in which the model can go forward or reverse, this tank here can only go forward. To turn on the model, this is done with a simple on and off switch, which is found on the bottom of the vehicle. As you can see, I went ahead and painted the switch red to indicate whether it's on or off. Now, in addition to this, the kit does supply you with a set of stickers that have the exact same information on it. However, the stickers are much larger and are much more of an eyesore in my opinion. In addition to the on and off indicator label, they also have a bunch of warning labels to put on the sides of the fenders, which is definitely more than likely due for legal purposes and lowering up the kit, and is definitely not something that you're going to see on my build here.
I will now turn on the model.
I will set her down and let her advance to some Germans.
Well, as you can see from the running footage, the model does run in a very smooth and consistent manner, and the obstacles of the wooden planks were no match for the Char B1 Bis. Now, having said that, this model here is definitely not something that you're going to be able to run outdoors. It is just far too underpowered for that type of running, for both the smaller 1/35 scale as well as just, I mean, the thing is powered by 2 AAA batteries. Realistically, this is one of those type of running models that is 99% of the time kept in a static form, and then once in a while on a rainy day, you take it out and you have it run on your floor or on your desk, causing ruckus to any sort of obstacle that may or may not be in its way. As for a skill level and recommendation, the model here being a Tamiya kit and being based off of the original static version, does assemble very easily. If I can recall, the first version was built in about 2 days, and these Tamiya kits are just known to assemble very quickly and effortlessly. However, due to the added complexity of the motorization system, it does make the model slightly more elaborate and complicated compared to the static counterpart. Because of this added complexity, I really recommend this model to someone that's more of an intermediate builder, and definitely someone to an advanced range can easily tackle this build. Overall, I'm very happy the way the model turned out. It's a good counterpart to the static version, which I've already had on hand, and it is a unique type build in that it's interesting to see Tamiya go back to their roots in making models that are motorized again. One of the traits that this model has, and is one that I definitely appreciate, was the way that Tamiya re-engineered the static kit to convert it to motorization. Outside of the 2 holes found in the back, there aren't exactly a whole lot of compromises which were made to the model in order to achieve the motorization aspect and for the motorization to actually work fairly well. Because of this, the model visually looks basically identical to the static counterpart and can be used intermixed with each other. So much so that this tank can be used to enhance a diorama display or looks awesome as a shelf/desk display piece. However, unlike the static counterpart, if the rainy day or the boredom ever arises, you can easily take this guy out of the case and have him zip around your desk. And with having these 2 now under my belt, I wouldn't be surprised if I go ahead and progress to get the 2 other versions that are supplied with the Tamiya instructions, just for the simple sake of completing and rounding off the collection. And that concludes this model showcase video for this motorized 1/35th scale French B1 bis heavy tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this build as well as many of the other builds that I've posted on the ECA channel in the past. And don't forget to stop by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.